Anywhere online will be fine. I'm telling you. Okay, so when you read it in the Masoretic, you're like, why is the story even in there? And then when you read it in the Septuagint, it's like God gets the glory.
Let me see if I can find a.
I mean, I'm telling you, there was a lady from the Seventh-day Adventist Church that when we were talking about the Septuagint, she actually reaches into her purse and pulls out a pack of papers. And she says that, as far as the Septuagint is concerned, I like the book of Esther. And she actually showed me and sort of commissioned me to read it, and then when I read it, I'm like, wow, God really gets the glory in this story.
Let's see, the Book of Esther from the Greek Septuagint. Okay, all right, I got a copy of it right here. I'm gonna make sure I read it.
Please do. You'll be like, Stacy, why didn't you tell me about this earlier?
So what do you think, without reading it, I don't know yet, but what motivated the Masoretes? They obviously changed it.
Yeah, they definitely had to change it because the ages are all wrong after the flood.
Well, I would say they would, in their mentality, they would believe that God doesn't need to get the glory. We need to get the glory.
Well, do you remember what Nathan said, that it was because they didn't want to acknowledge that the order of Melchizedek was actually a higher order. So they conspired and made it so that Shem, Superman,
And
Shem
they would
was
say that,
alive at the same time of Abraham, which is complete silliness.
and the Masoretes would actually say that God came and he failed. Therefore, it is up to us to be a light to the nations and to bring mankind into enlightenment. So therefore, what the Masoretes have done is they've taken the Messiah role away from God and placed it upon themselves. So when they interpret and look at Isaiah 53 and stuff, they see that as themselves.
The Jews.
Yes.
You knew the Jews were behind it, right?
Right, of course.
Well, I mean, the Masoretes are Jews, but...
Which Jews
But
are we talking? The real ones or the fake ones?
I'd call them the scribes.
Yeah.
Maybe the odd Pharisee.
Fair enough.
10 years ago, if you said something like that, you'd be considered a heretic, eh?
Even today, I think.
He
Oh,
would,
even today,
yeah,
yeah.
don't worry. Somebody will find a reason.
Yeah.
One thing also is that I think it's in Psalm 145. You have different stanzas or verses, and each one is according to the letter of the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Masoretic text, none is completely absent, which is the letter N, is completely gone. So it sort of like makes you think, why is it that you go through Aleph through Tav, and yet there's one letter that's missing, but the Septuagint actually has it in there. So Psalm 145 is a good thing. And then also when the writer of Hebrews is actually talking in chapter 10, verses 6 through 8, I think it is, where he's saying that he's basically talking about the Messiah and how the Messiah was to be a sacrifice. And then he's actually quoting Psalm 40, verse 6, which is saying, a body you have prepared for me. So it goes completely in line with what the writer of Hebrews was seeing and referencing when he was writing that book. But yet, when you look at the Masoretic, it says, you have opened my ears. Completely different. And the way that you can start to recognize there's something awry here is that if you're diligent enough to where when you're reading the New Testament and you say it is written or something, and you see the reference and you go back to the Old Testament and you read it and it has nothing to do with that, you're like, what is this? But if you go back to the Septuagint reference and look at it, it's exactly almost word for word. So the writers of the New Testament were actually using the Septuagint more than they would be using the pre-Masoretic scriptures. If that makes sense. And I didn't mean to get crickets.
I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through.
You're looking at Esther. I mean, I'm telling you, you'll be like, Stacy, you should have commanded me to do this earlier.
Well, I mean, I just scrolling through quick, I see how God is mentioned, and he's not mentioned at all in the Masoretic.
I know
What is,
that alone should be enough weight, you know? I mean, you'll read Esther and you'll be, wow, this book is one of my favorites in the entire Bible when you read it in the Septuagint.
I want to read in both. First, I want to read it in the Masoretic, and then I
Yeah,
want to read it.
right,
So I can
right.
see the difference.
It's not going to take you more than 45 minutes to an hour or something to read actually both.
Yeah.
But you read it in the Masoretic and you're like, okay, yeah, right. I mean, why is the story even in here? And then you read it in the Septuagint and it's like God gets the glory in every instance.
But
I know now which one is the one to read for sure.
aside from God getting the glory, there must be another reason why they took him out of it.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the Jews are sort of,
Where were they when it was written?
I don't know that, but I will say that the Jews are sort of disgusted with God because God was supposed to come down here as an earthly king and rule the world and basically have the Jews as his primary nobility. And because he failed to do that, they basically look at him with somewhat disgust. Not all. It's hard to speak in generalities, but that seems to be more like a subconscious type of motivation to what they're doing. Because I mean, even the fact that they look at Isaiah 53, which is one of the servant psalms, that you must suffer and you must do these things to bring about enlightenment. They look at that as themselves. So they've clearly taken the role of the Messiah and replaced it with the nation of Israel. So even if they don't say it, explicitly in their motivation and their mentality, that's exactly what they're doing. In fact, there are several rabbis that say that Jonah Bar Kokhba, I think it was, that was a Jewish zealot,
Simon.
probably 2nd century or something.
Simon.
Simon, okay, you're right, Simon Bar Kokhba.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in the 1st or 2nd century, somewhere early on, they say that he actually had more prophecies that were fulfilled of the coming of the Messiah than Jesus did. And he rose up against the Romans, but he failed. Therefore, it is up to us to take on the role of the Messiah. That's how they see it.
Mm. What do you think would happen if you read Esther with a covenantal lens on?
I
Think you
think
might think you might see something in there?
I don't know. I think
Absolutely.
that if you look with a covenantal lens, you'll see, you'll be surprised, and you'll see things that you wouldn't necessarily see. However, I want to admit that Zach corrected me in my covenantal lens interpretation of Ezekiel. Did you get a chance to hear that yet?
No.
Okay,
That's what I thought. That's
Zach
what I thought.
tells me, and Zach is far more um, literate in First and Second Kings and the Chronicles. Okay, so I mean, this guy is the go-to as far as the Old Testament is concerned. And he was telling me, yes, there was other invasions into Israel. So because of that, I can actually see that. So basically, where we left at the last time is, one, I'm not comfortable with his interpretation of Ezekiel 5, chapter 5, verse 9, which is saying, you will never see this again. This is something that I'm going to do that you'll never see again. His interpretation is, well, that was just the destruction part. And then when it talks later about 70 AD, that this is concerning just the divorce itself. So I'm not comfortable with that. And we left with the idea of, when we get to Ezekiel and we're looking through it, the first part he's saying is obviously relevant to the Babylonian um, invasions, more than one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, so that's fine.
Because there was a few of them, right? There
Was
was
that?
there was a few.
There was a few.
Yeah, from the time he was taken captive.
Right. So what I'm wanting to know is, where is the cutoff point in Ezekiel where he's not talking about the immediate destruction and he's talking about the final destruction? So
Does he for sure talk about it, Stacy?
well, that is also an assumption. Okay. I'm making the assumption that it might be there, and to just actively look for it. I don't know whether it's there or not, if I have to be truthful. So I'm going to say, if it is there, I'd like to know where that cutoff point is in the chapters, so that this first part is dealing with the immediate destruction that was in Ezekiel's lifetime versus the destruction of 70 AD and the final decimation of the
I'm
Jews.
sure that's exactly the exact same thing that messed up all the people originally. Isn't that the same? Like, that would make sense, right? Like, they would be so confused. They'd be like, wait, hold on.
I'm not quite sure.
I'm reading the scriptures here, but it's saying, like, it is for us, but then it's not for us. Like, this day did happen, but then, like, this part didn't happen. Like,
But I'm not entirely sure of how the dispensationalist would look at Ezekiel. My go-to thought is that when they look at the temple, that's in the future, but I'm not absolutely sure of where they look at Ezekiel and where they divide the chapters. or so. I think from 40 on, I think that's in the future, but I'm not absolutely sure. So you've got uh, the the dispensationalist, and then you've got the partial preterist, other than Matthew, which believes that all of the Old Testament was fulfilled already. But there's several pre-dispensation or pre-millennialist. Am I saying that? Partial eschatologists that would say, otherwise. So, I'm not quite sure where they would stand, but you have to look at a person's eschatology to actually see where they actually make the dividing line in Ezekiel. I'm interested in seeing where those dividing lines are, because I would imagine that there would be different places uh, concerning where your eschatology was. But at the same time, I have to admit that I would make an assumption to believe that any of that has to do with 70 AD after I've talked with Zach Friday night.
Okay, so does that also include Jeremiah and Daniel then?
I don't know yet. I'm just looking at Ezekiel at the moment. It might well cover over into Jeremiah as well.
Well,
But
Daniel was taken captive at the same time.
yes, Daniel was taken captive at the same time. And so I really need to look at Ezekiel a little bit deeper to see if he covers anything relevant to like Daniel chapter 12. Because Daniel chapter 12, we can all pretty much agree Daniel chapter 12 is dealing with 70 AD. There's pretty much no doubt about that. However, if Ezekiel is not covering any of that at all, I'm wondering if I need to revisit the idea of Daniel chapter 12 in dealing with that as far as the final destruction in Ezekiel's lifetime.
That's one of the
Because
things
I
I was
cannot,
always saying. I was
I
like, you
cannot,
gotta know when Ezekiel lived.
he lived at the same time that Daniel did. They were contemporaries. They were
Right.
both
And
at the
therefore,
same
you have to
time.
know what they're talking about based on when they lived.
Daniel was inside, Ezekiel was outside.
Bam. There you go.
But if Ezekiel never talks about the destruction of 70 AD, then why would I just automatically assume, well, Daniel is talking about 70 AD? So
Exactly.
it
Well,
does.
Daniel is told point
It,
blank, like 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. Like Ezekiel ain't told that kind of information.
well, it is. Nevertheless, it is a challenge to full preterism, for sure. So that's the reason why I
Sure, you
want to
can
see
see that.
where, if there is a line drawn between the immediate destruction in Ezekiel's lifetime and the destruction of the Jews in 70 AD.
I would imagine that Ezekiel's destruction was the first time, but there could be at the end maybe a foreshadow of the future. But I'm just saying,
Well,
Ezekiel was way back in the day with Daniel, like you said. So therefore, his destruction is talking about. Well, see, when is Ezekiel at Daniel's time? Before or after the captivity?
They're all at the same time.
That answers the question.
they're at the same time. But another thing besides
They were already captured, so that means that he has to be talking about the future one.
besides Ezekiel chapter 5:9, okay, that is a verse that I can't seem to just easily gloss over or dismiss. Besides that, there's also the fact that in the book of Revelation, the imagery that Ezekiel invokes is also used in Revelation. So therefore, I think it's safe to make an assumption that go ahead.
Read it. That's all I'm saying.
So I would say that it is a safe assumption to make automatically that somewhere in the book of Ezekiel, he is talking about the destruction in 70 AD because the language of Revelation is actually exactly like the language that Ezekiel uses.
Again, again, if you're telling me that Ezekiel is at the same time of Daniel, Daniel being after the captivity of the original one, can't be prophesying about something that already happened. So he has to be prophesying about the next one, and the only other next one is 70 AD.
Well, the thing is, though, is that Zach showed me that Ezekiel was actually prophesying of an event that was to take place in Ezekiel's lifetime because he went to Chronicles and he actually showed me. So because of that, and I have to admit, I'm weak in, I mean, I've had
I
a
think you
Bible
just don't.
study.
I think you just haven't read Ezekiel all full out. Like I think you'll figure it out soon. Like we just have to keep going.
Well, the thing is that you can't just take Ezekiel by itself in a vacuum. You have to look at First and Second Chronicles
Why? Why do I
and
have to
Second
look at that?
Kings because it actually tells you.
Because it came first.
It actually tells you plainly and clearly that there was another invasion.
Yeah, there was the Assyrian invasion, and then there was Babylonia.
No. You look at you look at Chronicles, and it will tell you that there was not only one Babylonian invasion, but another one.
Of course there were. Nebuchadnezzar, it wasn't just like, oh hey, like let me just roll up and take your whole. Like no, there was definitely like multiple sieges. I can
So
agree.
then it leads to logic that if there was an impending invasion again from that king, that when Ezekiel was talking, he was prophesying about that matter.
Okay, yeah, so that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. So why can't it be that he was prophesying about the immediate thing right now? He was like, yo, we're all about to get wrecked. We're all going to go into captivity. We're all going to get Scrooged. But then also at the end of his prophecy, at the end of the book, now he's talking about like some other time in the future.
That's right.
They're,
And so
they're going to get Scrooged again. But
what I had spoken to Zach about is, okay, you've showed me the error of my ways. I'd like to see where that line of cutoff is, if it exists.
you
I'm
haven't.
not quite sure. I'm not entirely sure that that line exists or not.
Right.
That
So why
would
did it-
be, to be truthful, that would be an assumption. Okay, this line exists. Where is it? I don't know if it even exists or
shut
not.
up. If there
But
is a
while I'm
cutoff.
looking at Ezekiel through a covenantal lens,
Right.
I would
I
like
know.
to see
I'm,
where the cutoff is
me
in the
too.
chapters.
I'm
Okay.
down. I'm down. Let's do it. Let's find out. Where is it? Let's look.
So this timeline here says in 593, Ezekiel was 30, Jeremiah is 55, and Daniel is 35. Daniel has been in Babylon for 12 years.
You know that stuff that you just mentioned about all these numbers and stuff. I for some reason I'm never able to retain those numbers or the dates, and they just go completely over my head. So for
For
me,
Daniel to be 35 when he first gets there, that's
my understanding is Ezekiel and Daniel are pretty much at the same time, but I would imagine that Ezekiel is older than Daniel, but according to the numbers that you have just quoted, which I've completely forgotten, by the way, I have no idea.
Well, it says that Ezekiel is 5 years older than Daniel, and Jeremiah is 20 years older than both of them.
and that's in the Bible or that's in some other
No,
script.
this is just a timeline.
Okay, so that leads also another question that I would have is, okay, so was Jeremiah prophesying about before the first invasion? And then, if that's the case, because he's older, where is he referring to 70 AD or the destruction of the nation of Israel? If he is, I have to admit, I would make an assumption if I say, okay, well, there's obviously going to be a cutoff point somewhere. I don't know whether there is or not now. I mean, going completely back to logic, I have to say, well, I would make an assumption if I decided that somewhere in Jeremiah there would be a line. I don't know whether there would be or not. I'm on the fence.
This says 593, Ezekiel sees his first visions and is placed into the office of as a prophet by God on July 5th, 593. Then in 587, 5 years later, whatever it is, there is a march, another march on Jerusalem.
Can I ask you?
No, I understand what you're saying. I understand.
What
I'm just
part-
giving maybe somebody has taken the time to go through Chronicles and go through all of these.
I'm just
I
asking.
don't know.
Just so you know, on purposes, do you know the difference between 536 and 586 BC?
536 is later.
What do you mean by later?
It's closer to us.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Stacy, I'm reading almost at the end of Esther here, and this sounds pretty covenantal to me.
You want to go ahead and go for it?
Listen,
I have to put a title to this video. You might as well do it up.
That will be very interesting. I mean, I love the Septuagint version of Esther.
So, all right,
So,
but this is in. All right, this is almost this is like the very end. Last two paragraphs actually. Then Mordecai said, God has done these things, for I remember a dream which I saw concerning these matters, and nothing thereof has failed. A little fountain became a river.
wait. All right. So when he said that I've seen a dream concerning these matters,
Mhm.
that's at the very beginning. There was a dream
There was
where
a
there
dream,
were two serpents that were fighting with each other.
right?
Okay. So that's actually what he's referring to. So in the Septuagint version, it's congruent in that everything that takes place is relevant to each other. Okay.
I mean, what I'm seeing in this last chapter is the culmination of 70 AD, bringing in the new covenant, where where Abraham becomes the father of many nations.
Uh-huh.
Gentiles are mentioned over and over again here. The inheritance, people being justified. So it says the next verse, a little fountain became a river, and there was light, and the sun, and much water. This river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. And the two, that's like the bride of Christ. And the two dragons are myself and Haman, and the nations were those which were assembled to destroy the name of the Jews. And my nation is this Israel, who cried to God and were saved. For the Lord has saved his people, and the Lord has delivered us from all those evils, and God has wrought signs and great wonders, which have not been done among the Gentiles. Therefore he has made two lots, one for the people of God and another for all the Gentiles. And these two lots came at the hour and time and day of judgment before God among all the nations.
Oh.
Sounds like 70 AD, time of judgment, where Jew and Gentile become one.
It sounds like 70 AD, but because I was burned this past thing with Ezekiel, I'm not going to be so quick to
Not going to be
jump
so
over
quick.
it.
Gotcha.
Right.
But we'll have to explore it then.
Sure, we will.
So God remembered his people and justified his inheritance. Doesn't it say that it says of Jesus, you will inherit the nations. Therefore, and justification, that's new covenant. Therefore, those days shall be given to them in the month Adar, the 14th and the 15th day of the same month, with an assembly and joy and with gladness before God, according to the generations forever among his people. Now, can you tell me again what Purim or Purim actually means?
Like what? What was the
Purim,
question?
Purim. The
Purim?
yeah, the holiday that they celebrated when the Jews were
I
pretty
mean,
much
I don't
saved.
think I've ever heard that word in my life. Are you saying P-O-R-U-M?
It's in the book. It's in Esther. It's
I've
the
never heard that term,
oh
or
yeah, I
at
mean
least
you've read it, you just forgot it. It's Purim.
Purim.
It's
Purim.
it's what they celebrated in the book of Esther. You know
I
when
mean, I know of the feast days because I've studied Leviticus
well, it's not
chapter
in the feast
23.
days. It doesn't appear in the feast days. This is something specific to the book of Esther. And,
No, I don't remember that. So,
all right, hang on. We're gonna find.
is there a word meaning to Purim? Maybe it's a word play. I always try to see what the word actually means because I found more often than not that it's actually a word play.
So here's just a little thing I just pulled up quick. So the Jolly Festival of Purim is celebrated every year on the 14th of the Hebrew month of Adar. Purim 2020. All right, this is just modern stuff here. The Persian Empire, the 4th century BCE, extended over 127 lands, and all the Jews were its subjects when King Ahasuerus had his wife, Queen Vashti, executed for failing to follow his orders. He arranged a beauty pageant to find a new queen. A Jewish girl, Esther, found favor in his eyes and became the new queen, though she refused to divulge her nationality. Meanwhile, the Jew-hating Haman was appointed prime minister of the empire. Mordecai, the leader of the Jews and Esther's cousin, defied the king's orders and refused to bow to Haman. Haman was incensed, and he convinced the king to issue a decree ordering the extermination of all the Jews on the 13th of Adar, a date chosen by a lottery Haman made. Mordecai galvanized all the Jews, convincing them to repent, fast, and pray to God. Meanwhile, Esther asked the king and Haman to join her for a feast. At a subsequent feast, Esther revealed to the king her Jewish identity. Haman was hanged. Mordecai was appointed prime minister in his stead, and a new decree was issued granting the Jews the right to defend themselves against their enemies. On the 13th of Adar, the Jews mobilized and killed many of their enemies. On the 14th, they rested and celebrated. In the capital of the city, Shushan, they took one more day to finish the job. Purim means lots in ancient Persian. The holiday was thus named since Haman had thrown lots to determine when he would carry out his diabolical scheme.
Okay, so
Oh,
I'm wondering.
it's actually pronounced Purim.
Okay, so I'm wondering if there is a feast day similar to that particular time frame or not. And one other thing that I want to mention is that Esther actually took a great leap of faith to actually go into the audience of the king, because my understanding is that during that time frame, if you did not have an audience with the king and you interrupted his protocol, that you could be immediately put to death.
I think
So
he had to hand out his scepter to you.
So when Esther actually went to approach the king, even though she was the queen, when she went to approach the king, in the law, he could have actually had basically committed her to death, because she broke protocol.
Hmm.
Because you are supposed to have an audience with the king before you go and see the king.
Isn't there isn't there a prophecy about Israel's salvation? And we know as preterists that Israel's salvation was really code for the saving of the nations. But the prophecy reads something like Israel will receive their inheritance, their lot. Um, there's something like that. I can't think of where it is. If I'm trying to look through this as a covenantal lens and try it out, see if it works. But Purim, if that's the case, if it is speaking of the nations getting saved, and then Purim means lots. In the new covenant, every man sitting under his own fig tree is like the nations getting their lot in the inheritance of God. Do you know what I mean? Like it almost seems like this is a story.
Right. I can see that, and that appeals to me, but it's not going to get me off the fence.
Right. No, I'm definitely gonna read
Well,
this.
I don't
in
like
full.
being burned, and I got burned by Zach. Okay. I don't like being burned.
I don't know if he really burned you though, because
Yeah, he did.
it still speaks of, you know, it could be speaking of something that happened in that time, but it could still be alluding to the ultimate fulfillment, which I think everything does allude to the ultimate fulfillment. What else could this story actually mean? It's definitely about Jews and Gentiles. There's no doubt about that.
Right. That's what the whole story, pretty much the way the New Testament authors were interpreting the Old Testament. That's the way they saw it. And that's pretty much basically this resonates with the Song of Moses. So if you keep these things always in mind in the back of your head, then when you look at things, it should, in my opinion, line out. But you know, I want to be very careful
Right.
to lens because I saw a spot. But still, 5:9 bothers me a great deal.
About never was and never will be again.
Right.
Yeah, but look at all the forever and ever and evers that don't really mean forever and ever.
So never will be again just means in your lifetime.
I don't know.
See that I mean I'm just
I know.
Zach's explanation of that was not satisfying to me still, and I don't know whether there is an answer to that question. So that's just where I'm sort of at now. But yes, there were multiple incursions into Israel in Ezekiel's lifetime. So the first part of Ezekiel definitely does look like what's mentioned in the Chronicles. So, I can't say that there was just one invasion and then everything that Ezekiel is talking about is referring to the destruction of Israel in 70 AD, because that's not the case.
That's why I asked when was Ezekiel.
Well, he was captive when Nebuchadnezzar went into Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Said there was a 2.5-year siege, no food, no famine.
Who was he really warning?
But that also gives me pause, because here's this great king. He's going to come in. He's going to take the nobility out of the nation, but yet he's going to leave their temple, the temple to their God that they would look to, and not his gods.
Well, there is the whole scenario where it does go over what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, where he was turned into basically a grazing animal for a while, right? So, like, what's
This,
up?
Went nuts, huh?
that's much. I would imagine that that's much after the fact.
But what is up with that? Like, you have to account for that in your view. Just curious. I'm not trying to like. I'm just asking.
Right. I don't know if anyone's actually done a timeline of Ezekiel and Daniel together in
Interesting.
what chapters of Daniel is referring to at the same time period of Ezekiel, if that's even possible. I don't know.
Right.
But then there's also the Septuagint versions of Daniel, which you've got Baal and the dragon, and you've got Susanna, which talk about the wisdom that
But
Daniel
but
experienced.
Bell and the Dragon though, Bell.
Those are beautiful works.
Who is Bell? Like, it's very important. Who is Bell? Bell and the Dragon. I mean, his name was Belteshazzar before it was changed to Daniel. Isn't Bell Daniel, or like, or am I wrong? Bell and the dragon, or Bell is the dragon? Because like,
No, you're making a valid point for sure. Bel could represent Daniel in that title of the story for sure. All I'm saying is that those works are also added to Daniel. And so what time frame in Ezekiel
yeah,
were they happening? I don't know. I don't even know if that's possible. But it would be very fascinating to me to see a timeline where Ezekiel and Daniel are overlaid upon one another.
me too. Rob, that's your mission. Do it.
It would almost take years to figure this out where you were so accurate that you were comfortable with it. You know what I mean?
I know. I mean,
Day.
I think it would take more than just years. I think it would take a lifetime. So, because it would take more than one lifetime,
It would take a lifetime, even with the internet. Really? Oh my gosh.
you have to be really selective of what you dive into because it's going to be a never ending layer of onions or a rabbit hole for sure.
Mm-hmm. But that's what makes it fun, right?
It does make it fun as long as you keep in mind what the basics are and you hold to the basics. Then, yeah, you can pursue these rabbit holes that go forever and ever. Um, but at the same time, you always remember what the basics are, which
Fair enough.
Matthew's very good explicitly mentioning what those basics are. And what
Yeah.
I've mentioned before is what exactly is the gospel. I'm not looking at what the
Right.
basics of the gospel are so that I'm lazy and I
Mhm.
don't have to do anything else. I'm looking at the basics of the gospel because over the years things can be added to it. So that now there are actually people who profess to be Christians that actually believe that it's not Jesus Christ who saves you, it's your knowledge of who Jesus Christ is that saves you.
Right. Well, it does say that right after, like, as soon as the disciples are about to depart, he's like, as soon as we go away and, like, we're not here anymore, wolves will come in. Like, he done told them straight up, like, wolves are going to come in right after us and they're going to tell you all sorts of retarded stuff. Don't believe him. That's all. That's all. You know, that's that's my advice. Don't believe him. Don't
In
believe
my
the
Sunday school class on Sunday morning, we were talking about Luke, probably chapter 22 or so, but it was about um, the disciples. They all ran away, they all denied him. And the question was, why would Luke portray such a disconcerting view of the disciples. And basically, their takeaway was that so that he could show that anyone could be a follower of Christ, and it didn't matter. You didn't have to be perfect or so. Basically, what I had said, though, is that Jesus was not really concerned or devastated the fact that Peter denied him because he actually prophesied and knew that Peter would deny him. And in other places, it says that he knew what was in the hearts and minds of men.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I would say is that Jesus was depressed or weighted down because he may have felt that his ministry was ineffectual. Because many times he said, "How long have I been with you? And yet you still do not know these things."
Right? Like, I
So,
mean, come on. If we hung out for at least like 2 years in a row, like, don't you think you should know at least a thing or two about me? Right?
pretty much, you're right. Right.
If you don't, like, bro, like, what would I
So,
eat? Eggs or would I eat Tyrannosaurus Rex flesh? Which one?
right. So when Jesus was in his angst or anguish uh, or frustration, I think it was basically because he was looking at the effect of his ministry versus whether his close friends would betray him, because he actually admitted to that fact. And then another thing is that one lady had mentioned we were talking about Judas betraying Jesus, and they basically went to the go-to of, oh, well, he was just interested in money and that's what he did.
Mm.
Okay, so if he was interested in money and that's the only reason, then why did he throw the money back out at the Pharisees? So
See?
there
They
was
forget
another lady
about these
that had
things,
mentioned
small details.
there
Did
was
you
another
ever?
lady that mentioned that he actually it's possible if you go into the mind of Judas and his motivation that he was actually wanting to bring about the ministry of the earthly king that the Jews thought would take place. And so he
Right.
was actually trying to force Jesus's hand. And then nobody disagreed with that view.
Right. He was
And then
basically one of
I
the
had mentioned
zealots.
I had mentioned also that Judas was the only one of the 12 disciples that was not Galilean.
Hmm.
And my
Well, it
pastor looked
says,
at me and he's like, I had forgotten all about that.
oh, so he's the only one that's not a Galilean because it says, "Have I not chosen you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil."
Did you guys ever think about why like what the name Judas is?
Well, it just basically it's from Judah. It means Jew. So
Right.
what I had mentioned is that this very might well be a play on events. You know how we do name play?
Hmm.
You know, behold, an Israelite indeed in whom is no guile, when he saw Nathanael coming towards him. Likewise, that this whole thing of Judas might be a play on events, and it's very possible.
My point being, one of them was a devil, so that rules out all kind of spiritual entities that are screwing with you. There's no devils like that. No demons. No. A demon, a devil, same difference. It's just some guy who's trying to screw you over. It's a man.
Right. I completely agree with you, but there are other people that you will not convince because they believe that the spirit of
I know.
Satan entered
Yeah.
into Judas and caused him to do what things he did. But
Right.
yet,
Oh,
they want to admit, but yet Judas is accountable for his actions because he allowed Satan to come in. And
exactly.
you just got this circular argument, you know. So, I mean, yeah, it's,
It's a good point.
but something you won't can be able to convince people, I don't think.
Why not?
And
definitely
it
won't.
still amazes me that Lutherans, of all people, Lutherans would defend and promote free will when Luther himself, if you just read the bondage of the will, he did not believe in free will. Yet somehow this denomination started from his actions and his teachings, but yet they believe in free will. I
mean, I have to believe in free will because I have the free will right now. Like, no offense. Like, I love y'all, but like, I do. Do I not? Like, you could maybe all both say, or maybe even everyone says, like, I wouldn't even do that. Like, you say I wouldn't do it, but what if I do? What if I just end the entire hangout right now? What if I just decide, like, I have free will to do that? I can end this whole thing that we're talking about right now. No more recordings, no more Zoom.
I would just start a new one.
I have no doubt.
Yeah, maybe other people would, but guess what?
I have no doubt that
I
you
have
think
the option
you
of doing
have free will.
Do I have that free will to do that? Or am I screwed? I have to do this. I have to do the recording. Like, you tell me.
All right, then let me ask you this. Where's the line at?
The line is where I draw it.
Okay, so you can add an inch to your shortness.
Yes, exactly. I can
And you
totally
can
stop it
turn
whenever
your
I
hair
feel like it,
black
but
or
that's
gray
only
or
because
whatever.
I'm in a position of power right now. Well, why would I do that? That's my only question. Like, why? Why would I just be like, you know what? Screw you guys. I'm done. Like, I'm out. Bye. Like, why would I do that? Like, doesn't make any sense. Everybody still has choice, no matter what.
Yeah, we're coming from the Reformed thought. I see it as you don't really have a choice, but you actually have the only choice you have is to observe, and your observation is the choice that was laid before you that was taken
Mm,
to see the outcome of that choice.
interesting. So, what choice would you pick? Continue on with the hangouts or cancel them, kill them?
Oh, cancel them for sure. We never say anything interesting in this.
Okay, fair enough. One vote for kill it. Matthew, what's your vote?
Doesn't matter.
Would you prefer to keep having these hangouts or should we stop? Kill
It's been predestined from before the foundation.
Okay, so I'm gonna chalk that up to a no opinion, like. And then I would have to ask Lori. You're the only other one here. Would you like to keep going with these hangouts, or would you like to terminate it? Like terminate it and kill it?
Are we having a problem?
No, we're not having a problem. I'm just asking a question.
For
How many
argument's
people are
sake,
still
for
interested in
argument's
keep
sake,
going? And how many are interested in terminating?
for argument's sake, she will say yes, that we should keep it. So I would say no,
Her.
we should not. Matthew has abstained. Lori has said yes, keep it. So that means that
You
there's a
didn't say
tie
anything.
between.
Yes. Go ahead.
Wait, listen to me. There's a tie between keeping it and removing it. So it's up to you, my brother Albert.
Well, it's always up to me because I'm the
Pick one.
master. I'm the one who makes people pay for this stuff.
So let us know your decision, great and mighty Albert. What do you choose?
It's not up to me. Like I have no problem
It
doing.
is.
Love, I love,
No. We've
I love,
already taken a vote. What?
I
Listen, we have
love
already taken a
talking to
vote.
y'all about all sorts of crazy stuff. So like, yes,
We have already taken a vote. There's one
I would keep
to
it.
abstain. There's one pro. There's one con. So everything is even. It's up to you to tip the balance, which is
No,
what
because
I
there's
think
four
you've
of
always
us.
wanted.
So you're wrong. So
Use your free will, Albert.
you, all right, well that's it. That's the end. There's no more hangouts. We're done. It's the end of it. Come the end of November, we're done.
I gotta send you some money too.
But no, you don't. I can pay for November if that's the end.
Did anybody? Has anybody?
I
Has
mean,
anybody?
if they're gonna let me end it so easily, like, why shouldn't I?
No, we can still visit. Just can't record it.
I mean, like, seriously, like, if I ended it right now, would any of you
Yeah,
pick it up where I left it off?
I wouldn't know how.
Exactly.
Has
Like,
anybody here ever seen the Arthur, the angry anti-Calvinist?
no. What is about Arthur?
His name is screen name is Buzzbird,
Like Buzz
and,
Aldrin?
and he hates Calvinism. He's this big fat guy, and he's always angry. Not angry, but like he's kind of demeaning, but not a very good personality.
Always
Sounds like
condescending.
a Calvinist.
Always kind of, yeah, but here's the thing.
Always like an Albert.
I just watched a video. I just watched a debate with him and Matt Slick, and it was very cool because he came on and he's like, "Matt, you bully everyone. Now it's time for you to get bullied."
You bully everyone. That's great.
So they debated on John 6:44. Are you guys familiar with that?
Could you by chance post that into the Discord for me so that I can maybe look at that when I get some time?
The debate?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
I definitely will. I'll do it tonight. Arthur, the angry anti-Calvinist, wanted to talk about John 6:44, and that's one of the proof texts that Calvinists use to prove their, Calvinist doctrine. It's, "No man can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I'll raise him up at the last day." So the interesting thing is that angry Arthur, he defended his position using something that I didn't know anyone else had ever noticed, because I've been saying this for a long time. The ones that were literally given to Jesus, Jesus says, "The ones that the Father gives to me, I will in no wise cast out." They're the 11. You can prove that scripturally, that they are relegated to the 11, and that's what Arthur tried to prove, but Matt Slick wouldn't have any of that. He just thinks that it's the ones who are given to Jesus is anyone who ever gets saved at any point in time. They're given.
I can see that viewpoint of where he talks about that at that time, those who you have given me is in audience relevance, the
Right.
period of that time that Jesus was. I can see that too. I mean, I can see where he's coming with that idea.
The one thing that he didn't.
This goes on perpetually,
Well, here's the reason for here's the argument, and his argument aligned with mine perfectly, but he forgot to bring up one thing. But his argument in the beginning, or his argument throughout was, all right, so Jesus says in John 6 that all those that the Father gives, I will in no wise cast out. And then he says, and I will lose none of them. And that's the operative phrase, lose none. So then he goes on to go to John 17, where from verses 6 to 20, Jesus specifically prays only for the ones who the Father gave to him, past tense. And he describes them, I was with them while, I was in the world. Then to put the nail in the coffin, in the next chapter, in chapter 18, at the arrest of Jesus, they want to arrest him and the 11. And Jesus says, "No, you've sought me, you found me, let them go." And then John, the writer, comments, "So that the saying, not the prophecy, but the saying might be fulfilled, of all those you have given me, I have lost none. So you could take those group of verses, John 6, John 17, John 18, and pretty much know that the ones who were, quote, given were the 11.
So what does it mean by lost?
Well, here's the thing that Buzzbird or Arthur didn't bring up, which is really, really important, something I noticed a long time ago. In John 6, that's where Jesus feeds the 5,000. But John 6 is a reenactment of the first Sabbath in Exodus, where the manna came down. And they were told to gather it for 6 days and then rest on the seventh. And that was the institution of the weekly Sabbath. But then, and what happened, the reason they got the manna is because they were grumbling. And in John 6, it literally says that the Pharisees were grumbling amongst themselves. And then they talk about what happened in the wilderness with the manna. And Jesus says, well, your forefathers ate the manna and they died. So then he went on to say, now you have to basically eat me. And that's when the 70 went away and they were kind of like cast out. But Jesus then goes on to talk about, how the ones who were given, he won't cast out. So these were the 11. But what happened with the feeding of the 5,000 is like the fulfillment of like the true bread coming down, and Jesus is feeding the 5,000 with bread, but then he goes on to say that I'm the bread. But the interesting thing is that when he's done feeding the 5,000, they take the fragments of the bread and they put them in 12 baskets. And it literally says in John 6, so that none would be lost. Speaking of the bread that was put in the 12 baskets.
Okay, so let me bring this challenge up to you from the view of your partial open theism, from an Arminianist aspect, okay?
Mhm.
So there are these 11 that are given to Jesus, and he does not turn them away, but yet they all flee and deny him. And I would imagine that an Arminianist would say that it was their free will that did so. Your partial open theism says that no, during that time, they had no choice. They had to deny him.
Yes, I would definitely say that,
But an Arminianist would say no, free will was still prominent in because they have to be responsible for their own actions. That's pretty much where free will sort of dominates, because people want justice and they want to be able to condemn the people that make choices that they do. So they say you had a choice.
yeah, well, I mean, that period of time there, how I look at it, it's very, very prophetic. And I think a lot of things are happening that, God just wanted them to happen the way that they happened. So, I wouldn't have any problem with God pretty much scripting that whole thing. I mean, I think,
But then you really, if that's the case, which I know that's what you believe, then God scripted this event, but then chooses not to script anything else
well, because
perpetually.
this event was to bring about the new covenant, in which now everyone who believes, or everyone who chooses to believe, can. So that's, to me, it was all a big setup for the cross. But that's why you have this dichotomy. If you go back to John 6:44, that what I started with, that what they were debating about is, it says that, the ones that what does it say? No man can come to me unless the Father who sent me draw them. So now, I mean, think about this. The Reformed mind or the Calvinist says, see, like they don't put read irrelevance there or context. They just take that as a blanket statement. No man in all of history can come to Jesus unless the Father draws him. But in John 12, I think it's 32, Jesus is talking about, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men. So in other words, you have two different time spans. You have
Wait. Does he say if or when? That's a big difference.
well, of course, we know he was lifted up. It wasn't a matter of if. He's basically saying, look, if I'm lifted up, in other words, and I don't even think they knew what he was talking about at that point. I'm sure they didn't. But remember, Isaiah 6 says, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. What Jesus is doing in John 12:32 is literally quoting Isaiah. He quotes Isaiah twice.
Right.
Once is, therefore they could not believe because of what Isaiah said.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, the Calvinists would say, well, of course Israel couldn't believe because they're totally depraved. No one can believe unless they're drawn. But John literally says that's why they couldn't believe. The Jews is because of what Isaiah said they would be blinded. So the blindness was specifically for the nation of Israel. And Jesus, while he's talking to the Pharisees in John 6, in the context of the blindness and spiritual stupor of Israel, says, no man, in context, in Israel, can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. But then go to John 12 and he says, and if I'm lifted up, we know it means when, I will then draw all men to myself. But the point I wanted to get to before is that when they put the remnants of the food in the baskets, it literally says, put them in the baskets that none be lost. And that's key, because then it goes on to say that of all the Father gives me, I will lose none. So that's a recurring phrase, lose none. Then in John 17, when Jesus prays for the men whom the Father gave to him, he says, I have lost none, save Judas, the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. And then in John 18, when he's arrested, Jesus says, let these go. And John says, that the saying might be fulfilled, of all you have given me, I've lost none. So the losing none starts with the bread being put in 12 baskets, which to me represents 12 apostles. Even though one fell away, he was going to be replaced by Paul. And another interesting thing is, how a lot of things are not mentioned in the synoptics and John. It's
right.
Well, the bread, the remnants of food being put in 12 baskets is mentioned in all four Gospels. It's really important. And Jesus literally says to them, it's in Mark 8, he literally says, don't you remember how many, and then he asks them, how
Right.
many
So
baskets?
basically, what you're telling me is that Lazarus was there. Ah.
Oh, you mean Lazarus, the writer of the book of John?
Right.
I suppose so, but my point is that the remnant of Israel are the apostles. Dispensationalists would say no, they would say there's still a remnant today. But the remnant saved out of the blinded nation was the apostles. They were given eyes to see, ears to hear. And of course, Jesus didn't lose any. See, I think they fell away for another reason. It's because Jesus had to be kind of the only true faithful one at that time. in Israel. Israel had to be completely like, this nation would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah. But then Jesus said to them, when you are restored. So he already knew they were going to be restored to the faith because they were going to be the witnesses. But as he's hanging on the cross, he's the only one. He's the faithful one, it seems. The rest of Israel is being done away with. I don't know. I think there's so many things we read over sometimes that have some significance.
Mm-hmm.
Some say if, some say when. Stacy?
Some say when.
Some say when, some say if.
Oh, you mean John 12:32?
Mm-hmm. ESV says when.
Which
King
one
James.
say if?
King James says if. ESV says when. But then it says in John 3:14, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up.
So shall the Son of Man be lifted up. Right. So, I mean, that's definite. So,
But the interesting thing too is that comes from Isaiah 6, like I said before. And in Isaiah 6, that's where God tells Isaiah to tell Israel that they would be covered with a spirit of stupor. Give them eyes to not see, ears to not hear. Make them blind, make them calloused.
right. But as far as the Textus Receptus is concerned, I like it. I mean, I have the actual Greek form of that, and I have the King James, but it's just one of many um, interpretations that you should be able to read.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly like the ESV and the fact that it says when. I completely agree with that. Versus if. If to me is conditional. And whether we get into the Ezekiel temple in chapter 40 on or not, is that's being conditional because of these ifs? Well, this clearly is a win.
Yeah, but it's just a way of like, we use the word if today when we mean when all the time, like to prove a point. Like I could say somebody, if I'm a great contractor, then, and I really mean I already am one. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean if? So I don't think that's,
Right, but that example that you're giving is an if compared to an attribute
mhm,
and not an if
not
compared
an
to
event.
an event. Right.
Yeah.
John 8:28 says, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own.
I'm just saying that the better translation of that verse is when, not
When.
if.
But it doesn't, when it's saying, and I, comma, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. I don't know if it's really saying if in the sense of if it happens or not.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, going in a Bible study and talking about, like what we were earlier, the Masoretic text and the Texas Receptus and all that. I mean, this is, I mean, this is not common.
My friend said the Septuagint is not even real.
Hmm. I have
mean, what
found,
do you even say to it? What do you even say to that?
well, I have found that the Septuagint is more congruent or more consistent with its basic theology than the Masoretic is.
You can read it online now, right?
You can, right?
On Bible
So,
Hub. What's it called though?
it's called the Brenton, or it's called the Apostolic Bible Polyglot on Bible Hub. Or it's called the Septuagint, or it's called the LXX, depending on which website you're at. I think the Bible Hub calls it the Brenton, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Does it? Why can't I see it?
Hold on. Let me go there and let me see real quick.
I mean, you can download a copy of the Brenton. It's just one person who translated the Septuagint into English.
That's right.
Mhm. Well, I've got one, but it's so hard to read it. The writing is so small for the printing. I like to read it side by side with a different version.
I would say if you go to Bible Hub and you click on the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, the entire Old Testament is the Septuagint, and the New Testament is the Textus Receptus.
I don't have Apostolic Bible Polyglot. Like, I did not see it.
Are you on BibleHub.com?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. If you're on BibleHub.com, you see at the very top part,
Version.
you start off, it says Genesis, and then it'll say the chapter, and it'll say version, and
Yeah,
it'll say
yeah.
commentary. All right. Click on language.
Language?
Yes.
Oh,
Hit
okay.
the down arrow on language,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll go to
Apostolic Bible Polyglot.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. I've looked for it so many times. You kept telling me it's on there, and I'm like, it is not on there, because I kept going to version.
Right. It's in language. Which
And then how do
the
you go
really
side by
cool-
side? You should be able to go side by side.
The cool thing about this is that, you've got the English interpretation of whoever translated it. You've got the Greek language above that, and above that you've got the Strong's numbering system. So you actually can see, what the actual definition of that Greek word is.
In the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth, but the earth was unseen and unready, and the darkness was upon the abyss. And the Spirit of God bore upon the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God beheld the light that it was good. And God parted between the light and between the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night.
So if you click on that word above bore, and you'll actually click on that Strong's number, and it'll say epiphero, which is 2018, and it'll say to bring upon or against, to impose, inflict. Now, I've heard interpretations before that the Spirit hovered over the water, so that means like a mother hen hovering over her chicks or so, but the actual Strong's Concordance doesn't really bear witness for that. I mean, you can look at any word in that translation, and you click on the Strong's number, and you can actually see what the
Yeah, I see
concordance
that. You don't even have to click on it. Just hold your cursor over it and it comes up.
Okay. Yeah, it does actually. It's real quick. But when you click on it, it actually will show you other verses that use that, because that's pivotal in understanding the word, is how is it used elsewhere too.
So on firmament, it says a solid body, a support, a strength, a firmness. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I haven't read this in a while.
And anarchy, which is the very first two words, is the same words that's in the gospel according to the writer of the beloved disciple. It's also the first two words.
So you guys don't think it was John that wrote Luke, eh? I mean, you guys don't think it was uh, John that wrote, you don't think it was Luke that wrote Luke, right?
Well, if I'm honest and I just go by what we have and I go by tota scriptura and not anything outside of that, which includes lots of tradition, then when I describe Luke and Acts, I will have to say the writer of Luke and Acts. I'll have to say the writer of John, or the gospel according to his beloved disciple, versus that this is John. There are other places that the Berean Bible Church, I think he's in Virginia. He actually did a series on this, and he's quite convincing in showing point by point of all the internal evidence that it was not John, the son of Zebedee, but that it was another individual, and that was John Lazarus. And I've not been able to find it was in the first or second letter to Clement or something that there was a mentioning of, you've got to read this other gospel. It's by John Lazarus. So it could still be that Lazarus's name was also Yochanan, but I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to find that for sure. So it's either John Lazarus or it's for sure Lazarus, and it was just misnamed John. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the internal evidence is pretty clear to me. But the first idea that you have is, that's crazy. All this time we've been thinking it's John, and all of a sudden you come up with this new idea. If you just look at the internal evidence itself, all these different passages, then I think it bears greater weight. And so I don't really have the choice of what I choose to believe if I'm wanting to throw out the tradition and look at the scriptures anew and just basically on their own merit without looking at tradition to interpret it for me. Then I don't really have a choice. Whatever the scripture says is what I have to believe. So I tend to, anyone that references Hebrews and they immediately say, Paul says in Hebrews, well, that's kind of a red flag to me, for one thing. And another thing is it doesn't really command my respect of you. But if you start to say, when you're talking about Hebrews and you say the writer of Hebrews says, you've automatically gained my respect, whether I actually agree with you or not. because you've actually acknowledged you don't know who wrote Hebrews.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to say goodnight, you guys. I'm going to go make some dinner.
Yeah. Well, it was good to talk to you guys. My phone had died for about an hour, and I was trying my best to get it back online. So uh,
Oh,
that's why I'm late.
have you got internet yet, Stacy?
No, just on my phone. So
Yeah. Does this suck up a lot of data being on here?
it probably is. I get 22 gigabytes a month. So this is the first month, so I'm not quite sure
How it'll
how this
go?
will play out or what it'll do. So, I'm in the experimental phase. So,
Yeah. Okay. I'll say goodnight to you guys.
okay, well, you guys have a great night.
Okay. Bye, Albert.
Okay.
Night.
Good night.
If you don't know, now you know.